Hello and welcome to part two of this video series about presuppositionalism. Um, so, continuing on question number three, how, if this is even possible, how do we know Jesus is the literal and physical resurrected manifestation of the omnigod and that all the core principles of Christianity are true? We're going to be looking at a website, proofthatgodexists.org. This website's matrix of questions really get into this stuff, but is it evidence that God exists? We'll talk about that. And even more importantly, for the religious landscape, does this method of reasoning lead one to knowing that Jesus is God? In a debate with atheist Matt Dillahunty, Jordan Peterson used the arguments and mindset of presuppositionalism to argue that Matt is not an atheist because he lives as if God exists. An atheist would live a morbid, immoral, tyrannical, hedonistic, evil life, and Matt doesn't, therefore, he's not an atheist. He lives as if there's a God, so he's a Christian. He lives in a Christian culture and he's saturated in this way of living, and he lives as if there is a God, which, check out the debate. Pretty interesting. Matt's response was really seemed very caught off guard, obviously. So I thought it was pretty interesting, pretty entertaining. But let's look into this method of argument being used by many Christians, even in my own local community. So I've had to research it myself. Hopefully, what I have to say today and throughout this video series will help you out a little bit. But let's take a look at this is an important point. There are different approaches of Christian apologists. So C.S. Lewis, his picture is on the bottom right. He represents an existential approach, which is basically saying, I know from myself. You capture the heart by appealing to the human longings. I know this is true by the feelings I feel. So that's that one. And then on the left, bottom left, you have classical. They have a world that they look at. They see evidence. They see there's evidence of creation. It looks like God was here. You hear the philosophers that may say the watchmaker analogy. You walk on the beach, you see a watch. Well, you obviously infer that it was designed because it was a watch. And so there's also this natural theology in that this is evidence to demonstrate theism. You can also see some videos from William Lane Craig on this approach. But when you look at William Lane Craig, we'll probably look at some of his things later. He is really actually an existential. He kind of says that it comes down to his feelings with the spirit, that he knows that it's true even regardless of certain evidences. So anyway, get into that on another day. But presuppositionalists, they go by the word. Use the scripture as the ultimate standard for all knowledge. The word is it's true, and we'll get into this. So let's look at some of these parts today. This website, proofthatgodexists.org, it's the arguments of presuppositionalism developed by Christian apologist Cy Bruggencate. He also has a debate with Matt Dillahunty, which is interesting. I recommend that one as well. His form and argumentation of presuppositional apologetics is not based on, quote unquote, this is quoting his website here I have at the bottom left side about him. He doesn't base his arguments on evidence and testimonies, as most traditional Christian apologists have and still are. Again, William Lane Craig. Cy writes that he learned that attempting to give evidence or touchy-feely testimonials to people who claim not to have enough evidence for God is to be fooled by them. So again, if you want to get a flavor for how Cy approaches people, you can check this website out. See some of his videos. Pretty interesting. I think his approach is pretty condescending. Personally, I think there's a better way to approach these discussions. Anyway, so let's go on this. We'll go on to this later, but just what you're about to see as I go on this website in a later video will be that you'll go through a step process. So this is the first screen when you get on the website, proofthatgodexists.org, and you start right off with these options that you must answer in order to advance into the arguments and axioms of presuppositionalism. So the first one is truth, and this is kind of the beginning, and I'm going to talk more about each one of these and the different options and what happens when you take each one. Absolute truth, and he says true for all people at all times everywhere. So before we end this video, there's a question. Does absolute truth exist? Think about that. And please join me on the next video. We're going to go through all this. Thank you for listening today.